It's crazy, but there are 7 weapons in Throne and Liberty, which means 2 weapon combinations make 21 unique classes in the game, and today we're gonna cover them all. This video is going to be about how different classes play in PvP and what fantasy heroes they correspond to, and I hope this video can help you decide which class to play on global release, or at least provide some useful insights into each weapon combination. I will not focus too much on which class is stronger in the current meta and why exactly. All that information can be found in my PvP tier list video available separately on my channel. This video is less about power and more about how each class feels to play. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. We're going to start with tanks, and I need to mention that this is going to be a more PvP focused review because that's where the specific differences between classes really shine in Throne and Liberty. In PvE, you can go in as almost any combination of sword and shield and fulfill your role of tanking the dungeon. Of course, some of the classes are more meta than others, and I will have a PvE tier list on my channel at some point in the future, but for now, we're focusing on PvP class fantasies. So with that out of the way, let's start with one of the staple tanks in Throne and Liberty, the SNS Dagger. Your role on the battlefield is the engager. In mass PvP, you are playing somewhere in the front line, taking some damage from the initial clash and looking to utilize your leap to get through the enemy front line and start pulling and pushing the enemy's backline closer to your damage dealers, or just being generally disruptive with your skills. The strong suits are your tankiness from the SNS weapon, your engage options with the dagger leap, and your evasion that is boosted by the dagger evasion passive. And you are the only tank that has true stealth to set up a perfect engage or get out if you find yourself a little bit too deep. The downsides are that you are more of a selfish single target hunter tank when it comes to your DPS. You can still do mass disrupt, but in terms of mass damage, you have less AoE bombing potential compared to SNS Greatsword, and of course not as much survivability through heals like SNS Wand has. So you have to play a get in and get out type of tank, compared to just standing there, soaking and out healing all damage. In terms of the class fantasy, it reminds me of Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy. He's sturdy, tanky, leaps into the battle, uses his daggers and can escape beaten up but alive. Another example is Duncan Idaho from the Dune movie. You can take on multiple enemies by effectively shielding, deflecting, evading their attacks. And ultimately, if you get the tier 2 SNS with multi-chain or Arc Boss SNS, you become all about pulling enemies and keeping them next to you, just like Scorpio from Mortal Kombat. Next one on the list is SNS Wand. This is your ultimate paladin class, so we will discuss the class as both tank and healer because it's kind of both at the same time. Your role is a disruptive, healing tank. You want to quickly get in the middle of the enemy blob. Instead of leaps and stealth, you're trying to initiate with mass sleep in large scale to set up a play for your team and then push and pull people in the middle of the Zerg while soaking a lot of damage, healing through it, and just basically grabbing as much attention and aggro from the enemies as you can. As a Wand SNS healer, your gameplay is sticking close to your team, healing them up where you can, and if the enemy makes a mistake of trying to burst you, you actually want that to happen as a Wand SNS healer because you just turtle up and out heal the damage, which should be easier than keeping a squishy teammate alive. The strong side is your survivability, which is now buffed to godlike levels because of your wand, so you're your own healer, and if you're managing your stamina well, you can rotate your well-timed blocks in between your healing cooldowns. You're staying in your healing puddle, and all this allows you to just outlive and survive what feels like 10 or 20 enemies just swarming you. As a healer, your strong suit in PvP is your defensiveness and the ability to withstand some damage in the front lines and not having to immediately retreat or stick to your backline of your raid. If you can't keep up and out-heal the enemy damage, you become effective even in small-scale PvP because you're so hard to kill, but this paladin class shines in the large scale the most. The only real negative is that your damage is considerably lower than some other tanks, and you're a bit less effective at pure healing compared to something like Wand Bow, and a bit less effective at sleep bombing than Wand Dagger, but these are only small trade-offs for the tankiness that SNS brings to the table. Since we already mentioned that SNS Wand is the ultimate paladin archetype in TNL, we have to go with Uther as the class fantasy here, the classic paladin that is tanky and heals allies. Another example from a different fantasy is Hagrid from Harry Potter, especially when it comes to healing side of the paladin build. He is the brawny, sturdy protector that is always nearby to save you when you need him and heal you up so you can keep going. A next tank is kind of the ultimate battlefield machine and is the Sword and Shield Greatsword, or SNS GS. Your main role is drawing as much aggro from the enemy as you can, similar to other tanks, but this time you can also slap back with tons of damage. GS brings a lot of short-range AoE capabilities, whether you're engaging with the AoE stun from the distance, or unleashing AoE Gaia Crash with Freeze, or focused Gaia Crash with a tier 2 Greatsword. Your role is to soak a lot of damage with increased HP and endurance, dive with your frontline and assassin groups, and even shield them by tethering and transforming some damage to yourself. Your strongest sides are your ability to endure the beating, your ability to protect your teammates and soak their damage, and of course your AoE CC and strong DPS on top of this. When you get close to the enemy, it's kinda Jower for them because of how many options you have to put them on the ground and slam them with the damage. There are hardly any negatives for this class. You need to have a very strong build, of course, because you don't have the daggers to escape, you need to be able to survive the enemy DPS with well-timed blocks, and you don't have the wand to rely on your own self-heals. In terms of the hero, which is the closest to SNS GS, for me it's Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, especially not the Strider version of early Aragorn, but the King version, the ultimate commander that charges first into battle, can withstand the beating, protects his fellowship with blood devotion, boosts other morale and attack speed with his Da Vinci heal, goes toe to toe with the toughest enemies with his army supporting him from the back, and still dishes out a lot of damage. Now that we covered the most meta tanks, let's quickly go through some other SNS combinations. SNS Staff, this is a situational type of PvP tank. It's a battle commander similar to SNS GS who traded their Greatsword for Staff to do damage from range. Your role here is kind of a war leader. You don't always leap first into the battle, you poke from range while focusing on surviving, so that you can do raid shot calling or lead a specific task force. Your strong side is the ability to do AoE damage from range and your overview of the battlefield. Since you don't need to jump into the enemy backline, you still have the whole enemy Zerg and most of your army visible in front of you, and it makes it easier to command. Because it's a mix of defensive melee weapon and offensive ranged weapon, the synergies that come from passive skills are not as strong as SNS GS for damage or SNS Wand for survivability. I would compare this class to Jeanne d'Arc or Joan of Arc. It's kind of a battlefield commander that carries the banner of your army. Your soldiers go in and die for you while you're casting magic spells all around. You kind of burn bright while you're fighting, but you eventually burn out, exactly like Jeanne d'Arc. SNS Bow has a similar role to SNS Staff. It is also a ranged, tanky shot caller. If you're not leading some sort of a group and not setting up plays for them, then you're better off playing a more meta tank that we discussed before. But if your role requires you to survive for a long time in a fight, while also setting up engages with your AoE crowd control skills like Tornado, or holding chokes and supporting your army from a bit back with AoE Flash Wave, then that's basically your role. Your strongest sides is your ranged AoE skills that kinda let you set up and control engages. You have a little bit of self-healing and shields from the bow, and you still keep your survivability from the SNS, so you're able to command and control the battle from the sidelines, but you are not as effective in the front lines like SNS GS tank or even SNS Dagger. To me, the best class fantasy for this class is the Flying Nazgul. This class is not as powerful as Nazgul, but it kinda does the same things. It lifts multiple people in the air with the Tornado, sets up engages and controls the battlefield from the sidelines, able to call a push or a retreat, and at the same time it can support that push with a flash wave or cover that retreat. Like Nazgul, it rarely goes one-on-one with people, and when it does, it can be killed by a dagger and a greatsword. SNS Crossbow is our final SNS combination. Not going to spend a lot of time on it because it does not synergize very well in PvP. Crossbow is a damage focused weapon, which is not getting boosted by anything from SNS side, and SNS strong suits are not getting boosted by Crossbow in the same way as daggers are boosting its evasion, GS boosting the HP and endurance, and Wand is giving straight up heals. In terms of what SNS Crossbow represents, to me it's like the Hound and Arya Stark from Game of Thrones. Yes, sometimes they travel together, but they don't vibe with each other until they really get to know each other, and even in the end their friendship doesn't really work out. Another example is Boba Fett from Star Wars. He is super tanky due to the Mandalorian armor, just like SNS. He has trip mines like Crossbow now does, and his blasters are exactly like Crossbow. You're probably missing half of your shots on geared people, just like every blaster user in Star Wars. Okay, gonna do the healers next. We already covered SNS Wand Paladin from both tanking and healing perspective. Go back and check it out if you missed it. Now let's cover Wand Bow, the ultimate healer at the moment because both Wand and Bow have healing skills. Your playstyle in PvP is mostly at the back of the group, trying to keep your teammates alive, healing outside of your party as well to top up the raid. The goal of your playstyle is to position yourself behind your front line so enemies struggle to get to you. There will be people hunting you, so if you see someone, root them, sleep them, reposition and keep healing. Your strongest suit is how well Wand and Bow synergizes to shield you and heal yourself and your allies. If you learn your cooldowns you can sustain incredibly well, your shields are effective against any dagger users that are using poison and thunder. Now, the only weakness in PvP is of course your lack of escape, so you will be hunted as so-called easy prey, but if you play well and position correctly you will feel very strong. I'm talking about Wand Bow as a healer because you will be expected to focus on healing in PvP, and if you're playing it as a selfish DPS, expect people to tell you that you should be playing a more useful range DPS class like Bow Staff or Bow Dagger. In terms of what it represents, I would say it's Tyrande from Warcraft universe. A ranger with healing abilities, wielding a bow, a perfect match. You have single target heals, AoE heals, ranger's mark, exactly like Tyrande. Next one is Wand Staff, a similar healer type class. It was the staple healer before the skill expressions came out and brought Bow to a higher level as another healer weapon. As Wand Staff, you have a very good healing output. It's a good synergy because your mana is boosted by the staff, you have some AoE damage and support skills from staff, especially the pull, where you can pull your allies to you to save them from sticky situations. That's your main role, keep your allies alive and play smart to pull them into safety and strike back at your enemies with some fire and ice. In terms of the class fantasy, it's a mix of Jaina Proudmoore representing the mage side of the combination with shields and AoE DPS, and Anduin representing the healer and utility aspects with his Leap of Faith pull and mass healing for the raid. Wand Dagger is another combination that is very popular as a healer, but it can also be played offensively in large-scale PvP to set up sleep bombs for your team. As a healer, you don't have the raw healing output of Wand Bow, and you're also missing the survivability of Wand SNS, but your strong side is your dagger that allows you to get away from anyone hunting you, and combined with your ability to heal up to full, it's like having a second life, which is very useful in PvP. While a little bit selfish, it is still good to have Wand Dagger healers in your roster, because they can set up huge plays for your team by getting close to enemy backline in stealth and mass sleeping the squishy targets to allow for a good initiation. In terms of what it represents, to me, Wand Dagger healer is like a mysterious plague doctor. You never know where he's coming from. Just like a plague doctor, Wand Dagger will not overstay their welcome and will use their daggers to get out back into the shadows where they come from. And in terms of the offensive side of Wand Dagger, to me it reminds me of a mix between Freddy Krueger and Lord Voldemort. Everyone hears stories about a good Wand Dagger, just like the Nightmare on Elm Street. Wand Dagger comes to you in your dreams, you're slept and cannot move, then it slashes you with its daggers, or bombs you by stacking curses on you like Voldemort and executing you with the curse explosion. the TNL version of Avada Kedavra. Wand Greatsword is a little bit less exciting. There is potential to cook on this class, but it doesn't synergize very well as a healer in PvP. Yes, there is some potential to tether your team with Blood Devotion, transfer their damage to you, and then heal it up with your own wand, making you something like Mercy from Overwatch that leaps to your ally with the Greatsword dash, tethers to you with Blood Devotion, provides healing for the both of you. Maybe if this class got a battle res like Mercy does, it could have stronger class identity, but for now, it's still cooking, and that's all we can say about it. In terms of the DPS aspect, Greatsword Wand suffers from the same lack of synergy as the healer version. You have a mass stun you can use as the engage, you can self-heal as well, but you would be taking a spot of a dedicated healer in arenas. If this class was a reality, it could be something like Saruman, being able to fight with a sword, disarming enemies with his lies, and spreading curses. But currently, it doesn't really work. Another weird synergy is Wand Crossbow. It doesn't really have a defined role on the PvP battlefield. Crossbow is all about boosting your damage projectiles, but Wand doesn't really have that many damage projectiles. It's all about instant curses, sleeps, and healing. So it's like a class that is a bit lost in what it's trying to do. To me, it is best represented by a confused Shroud, asking where the fuck I am.
Okay, let's do it. How come I don't have a pistol?
Where the fuck I am? What is this place?
Okay, let's move over to the DPS classes and start with the king of melee DPS, Greatsword Dagger. GS Dagger role has always been an assassin, but not exactly your sleek, extremely agile, fast-hitting rogue type assassin. That is Crossbow Dagger. GS Dagger is a brawler type assassin. Yes, its role is to strike from the sidelines, but once he jumps you, he uses heavy hits and makes every swing of his sword count. Your role is to lock down an opponent, put them on the ground, and delete them in 1 or 2 powerful swings. You're a menace on the enemy backline, dashing, hunting, deleting people, and then you're able to disappear. GS Dagger's strongest suit was always their ability to deal with tougher opponents 1v1. But now they also get the option to hit through tank blocks or do AoE crowd control. Your leaps and dashes along with movement speed buffs make you very agile and very heavy hitting PvP DPS. The main negative of this class is that it is a classic melee DPS, meaning that eventually you will have to engage into the group of enemies, and the bigger the group, the more exposed you are to damage. In large scale PvP, if you dash into the Zerg and don't have an escape plan, you are a sitting duck and will be stopped and burned down by ranged sniper mages or other melees very quickly. In terms of class fantasy, for me it's definitely The Witcher, with heavy swords and big swings, but also some speed and mobility. The synergy works well because it can also deal damage with daggers and get away into the night when needed. With the Arc Boss Teven dagger that resets your stealth if you burst down someone within 5 seconds of uncloaking, you can fulfill the ultimate Assassin's Creed class fantasy, where you appear from the shadows, dispatch the enemy, and disappear to hunt for your next prey. Greatsword Bow. To me, the role of this class is a little bit undercooked. You're a good brawler that can damage from long range and close range, but you do not excel at either. When you go into melee range, your combo lacks the buffs that you get from a dagger, but when you are shooting your bow from long range, you are not getting too many buffs from Greatsword either. Yes, the extra hit is useful, but the extra HP or defense does not make you into a battlefield commander like SNS Bow. To me, Greatsword Bow just feels like early Aragorn. We discussed that the ultimate version of Aragorn, the King of Men, is SNS Greatsword. He leads the whole armies into battle, protects his allies, and attacks the strongest foes. GS Bow is Strider, the ranger version of Aragorn, still carrying his bow, a little bit more agile than the SNS GS version, quicker, more nimble, able to dish out some good damage, but a lot less survivable, and still searching for his true calling. Greatsword Staff. Slightly different than Greatsword Bow, we have seen people cook on this build, especially when it comes to one-on-one or small-scale PvP. Both of these weapons scale well from heavy attack, so if built correctly, the class becomes strong in close quarters and very effective at range DPS. You can jump in for a stun, execute your melee combo, blink out with a staff and finish the enemy with big lightning or fireballs. The negatives are obvious. You're lacking some escape that GS Dagger or Staff Dagger would have, and you're lacking survivability that SNS GS or SNS Staff would have. I hope you already know who the class archetype is for Greatsword Staff. It's literally Gandalf. You wield a greatsword and you have a fiery staff. Even some of the abilities sound like they're from Gandalf's toolkit. High focus, that buffs your cooldown and movement speed before you go into battle. Passives buffing your heavy attack and fireball type skills. You engage from the distance with your magic skills and then leap towards the enemies and go swinging your greatsword for a short time. Then you get out to wait for your hard-hitting cooldowns, or if you could not get out, you die. Get reborn as Gandalf the White and go again. Greatsword Crossbow, a bit of a different combination, and it can work in some very skilled hands. The role you're trying to fulfill is of a mid-ranged fighter that is hitting hard and hitting fast. With skill expression, this class has gained popularity because of the crossbow spin to win skill that does insane amount of damage around them as long as they're not interrupted. So the idea is to engage from the sidelines with your greatsword mass stun, and while their enemies are stunned, you spin to win until you die. This is literally Deadpool. Let me cook, Deadpool is obnoxious. He leaps into the battle, swinging his swords around, shooting his guns all around him while rolling everywhere. When GS Crossbow jumps in the middle of you, stuns everyone and begins spinning, it becomes the center of attention, just like Deadpool. The ultimate, edgy, annoying class. But if you're good, you're farming clips. Greatsword Wand. We already discussed this earlier as Wand Greatsword, but I touched on both the healing side and the DPS side of the combo, so we're moving on to the true range DPS classes, and starting off with Staff Dagger. Staff Dagger is the classic mage DPS in TNL PvP. You might think it would be Staff Wand, but as I explained before, you would be considered a healer if you're playing Staff Wand. So if you want to play a mage and focus on DPS, Staff Dagger is one of your options. Your role is to bomb from the backline with your AoE damage skills and follow up to finish low targets with fire or lightning. At one point in the game, Staff Dagger was the ultimate bomber, where the tank would dive a group of enemies, pull all of them in quicksand, and Staff would unleash a hard-hitting AoE meteor from stealth, wiping everyone out. These days, the playstyle has changed a little, and Staff is no longer just a one-trick pony, but instead it has a pretty versatile skill set, which feels a little bit like a ranged assassin. I could not come up with a class fantasy for this combo, and my friend Scythe suggested Snake from Metal Gear Solid. And to be honest, it works perfectly. You care a lot about positioning, just like Snake. You shoot hard-hitting fire attacks, just like his RPG. You're effective at melting tanks in TNL, again just like Snake fighting a giant tank with his RPG. And you have daggers to stealth and confuse the enemy, just like Snake hiding in plain sight and playing mind tricks. Next one is your ultimate range DPS class, Staff Bow. The role of this class is to deal constant damage, whether a single target or AoE, and on the battlefield you're basically a ranged turret that picks a good position and starts deleting enemies at maximum range possible. The strongest aspect is the fact that Bow Staff has longest range, so you can burst someone down potentially before they can get to you. The biggest negative is you're lacking a bit of survivability and defense. You have CC skills and shields to compensate for it for a while, but eventually, if you get jumped multiple times, you're likely to go down, so good positioning is most important for this class.
Save me!
I would compare this class to famous IRL snipers, such as Lady Death for example. Similar to a sniper, you need to know your surroundings, find a good position, It will be usually elevated somewhere on top of the wall, a tree, or at the back of your army. And then another important aspect is picking your targets correctly and bursting them down quickly and with precision, just like a ranged turret or a sniper. Staff crossbow and bow crossbow. These are some other strange combinations that don't have a well-defined role in PvP. From power and usefulness perspective, they're not the same, and you can check my PvP tier list for which I think is the stronger class, but from how they play on the battlefield, they are somewhat similar. I guess if you're trying to make it work, your role would be that of a mid-range turret, constantly firing projectiles trying to overwhelm the enemy. You have a lot of firepower, and both of your weapons, whether staff crossbow or bow crossbow, have some range, but not as much range as staff bow. You also lack any serious defenses and escape that Staff Dagger or Bow Dagger would have, and that's why these classes are not widely used in PvP. To me, I would compare these classes to Doctor Strange from Marvel, because it feels like you have many hands and are always firing something at the enemy, whether it's a lot of small projectiles or big fireballs and meteors. And then at the end of your barrage, you might be fully exhausted and out of mana.
This time it's gonna take more than killing me to kill me.
Bow Dagger, another ranged assassin with the ability to CC and execute single enemies from range, or use some of the new AoE skills like Tornado and Flash Wave to support their army with crowd control, damage, and even off heals. With the skill expressions, the class is becoming more versatile, but the main role of this class remains the same, executing low targets from range or pouncing with the daggers when necessary. The strongest side is the agility, the evasion, and stealth as the escape option, which you can also reset with this class. And the negative is that the total damage is arguably lower than when two ranged DPS weapons are combined, like bow staff. In terms of the class fantasy, you play this class like Sylvanas from Warcraft or Legolas from Lord of the Rings, both archers that fight at range. Both are extremely agile and also fast with their daggers at close range too. Strafing on bow is a multi-shot like Sylvanas Withering Fire, and generally with the dagger leaps and rolls, it feels like you're playing Legolas in most situations. And finally, Crossbow Dagger. This one is tricky for multiple reasons. For the longest time, it feels like this is a weapon combo that can be described as TNL's midlife crisis. It is always trying to change and evolve, but it feels like it never gets there. First, it started as an idea of the ultimate leaping assassin that jumps you from the shadows, throws a million bolts and daggers into you, and then disappears. But people quickly realized that in order to successfully perform in large scale, you need Arcboss Tevin Dagger to effectively disappear after every kill, or you will just keep dying as soon as you dive into a clump. Then came the multi-shot era, where you needed Arcboss Bellendir Crossbow, and once you get it, you were staggering tens of enemies in one shot and applying lethal poison to them. Then it turned into a spin to win class that hits hard, but hardly hits anyone. Ultimately, the playstyle stays the same. It's the class that expects you to pre-buff, click as many buttons as you can to execute your combo, and hopefully get out. If you like being super mobile, always jumping around the battlefield and dealing insane amount of damage very quickly, play Crossbow Daggers, and some days you might feel stronger, other days you will feel weaker, but it's the only class that will give you this high actions per minute experience on low ping. The class fantasy for this would be Loki. One moment he's in front of you, next moment he's behind you, he kind of appears out of thin air, jumps around, doing his tricks and deceptions, and if you're unlucky, you might die before you are able to react. And Loki is already going to his next victim. That basically covers all the weapon combos and how each plays on the PvP battlefield. I'm new to content creation and this took me a long time to make, so if you enjoyed this, leave me a like and share it with someone who's planning to play Throne and Liberty global release. Don't forget to subscribe to get even more cool TNL content in your YouTube feed, but for now, Crazytrick out.